y'all are cold. I didn't turn it on. I'm freezing cold.
But they're always
No, you know what they did over the summer? You know they closed over the summer.
yeah.
Yeah. So what they did was they
Revamped the air conditioning as well.
the heating and air conditioning. That's what they were doing. That's the whole reason for the close.
I thought it was also that whole mold issue.
Yeah. Well, evidently they found mold in all the heating and air conditioning.
Yeah.
So they
That is our lab.
they're different. Like they look totally different too. They used to be bigger, a little slightly bigger. You can see.
There was like a giant box.
What's that? Yeah, and only some of the rooms have these. Most of the rooms have the, like my room was changed over. I don't have one of those anymore. I used to have one of those.
Yeah, ours
But now I have works. What's that?
ours doesn't work.
It doesn't work at all.
I don't know if they fixed it yet, but so far it's working. Really weird.
Nothing blows out of it. Wow.
Huh?
All right. I'm going to do this so that the audio did not record last time, and I think that's because this headset I have has a mute on it, and it was on mute. So, although the lecture from last time we met was videotaped, there's no sound to it, which is unfortunate. So that's a technical difficulty. Today it should be better, should work, and yeah, it's on. Okay, so the plan for today. What I want to do today is continue through so that we all have a published map service in ArcGIS. Okay, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna continue that through. The university still didn't open the port. The university didn't assign it an external IP address, but they did open the ports that we need open. So I'm hoping that what we do works from the coast. I don't know whether it will or not. It all depends on whether or not you can see an internal VPN, and I didn't get an answer from iTech. So I don't know whether you guys are on the same network, but if you can see this IP address, you'll be able to do this. If not, then you'll have to wait until they do that. I know it'll be later this week, or I hope it'll be later this week. So we'll see right here at the beginning. So anyway, after we do that, publish that service, we're going to talk about that service for a little while, and then I'm going to get into a little more general nuts and bolts with web services, mapping web services, and talk about open web services. And instead of publishing our own today, because I didn't quite get GeoServer installed on the server yet, instead of publishing our own, we'll use some examples from the I published a reading already. I don't have an assignment for today, so we'll get through that stuff. It might take the whole 2 hours, but if not, then it doesn't. So why don't we start off today by opening up ArcMap, where we were the last time we met, and bring up the map document that you had up. Okay, make sure that still exists. So I'm going to open up my map. Did Did I call it map 1? Hopefully this is what I called it. Yep, looks like it. So I've got my map service up. I mean, sorry, my map that I created. It's called map 1. All right. Now, we were in the middle of making a connection to our server so that we could publish a server when we stopped last week. So that's what we're going to do to start off. We're going to try to make a connection, and you'll know on the coast instantly if you can access the server using this URL. So what I would do to do that, I think, is go to what we call ARC catalog to make the connection. I forgot whether I actually made the connection later in class. If I did, I'll make another connection. Hold on, let me see what this says. All right. So I'm going to go to this ARC catalog. Should have used that before in one of your other GIS classes. Go down to go down to the one called GIS servers and expand it. Okay. Here you're going to add an ArcGIS server. So add ArcGIS server. And then eventually we'll probably move you all to administer GIS server. I mean, sorry, publish GIS server. But for now, we only have one account, and that is the administrator of the GIS server. So if you were to set this up in your own shop down the road, basically know that there are 3 different levels. One for administering the server, which means that basically you can create services, you can destroy services, you can change the settings of the server. Basically, you have all the power. That's the administrator. You can have more than one administrator. Where right now we have one account set up, and it's an administrator. You can also give out other things for other people in your organization, or if your service is published wider than your organization, everywhere in the world. And that is to publish GIS services, which means that they can create new GIS services, but they can't destroy existing GIS services. They also can't change any of the server settings. And then finally, use GIS services. That just means they can connect to your server and use your GIS services. Okay, so we're gonna go to administer GIS server, and hit next. And this is where we're going to put in the URL of the server. And I forgot to. Here it is right here. I forgot a pen. It's 10.64.78.100. So 10.64.78.100. Okay. Now, when ArcGIS server installs, it installs and works on port 6080, which is not the default internet port. That's port 80. I installed another piece of software that makes it so that a request coming into the ArcGIS server will be forwarded to port 6080. So it's not necessary. You could put :6080, but you don't have to. So I'm not going to here. Just put in the IP address and then /ArcGIS. By the way, this portion, this ArcGIS portion, if you remember, that was customizable. That was one of the only things that was customizable when we set it up. But almost nobody changes that. So we just left it the same. Okay, ArcGIS. For the username and the password, you enter the username and the password that we set up, which is SITE admin, ADMIN, and the password that we gave it was capital W, the number 3, capital B, lowercase m, the @ sign, TPER. All the last part is all lowercase. So it's kind of like Web Mapper, but there's a few capitals and numbers to remember. Okay. All right. Then hit finish. Sorry, did you not get that? I'll write it here. Sorry, what was that? I couldn't hear you all down there. That's the password right there. Site admin is the username, and that's the password. Oh, the projector's not on the front? Hey, can you all hear me on the coast? Hello? Hello? Jonathan? Can you all hear me? I guess they can't hear me. All right. Let me call Jennifer really quick and see what she says. That she can do, and then we'll get back to it. Hey, I'm teaching my class, and I've just realized that I think that the people down on the coast. All right. Can y'all hear me on the coast? All right. For the people up here, have you been able to connect? Did it work? Sweet. All right, everybody's got it working. All right. No, there's no way to control their camera from up here. There's no way to control the camera. There's no way to like turn on their, because right now their overhead projector isn't even on. So it's possible that their sound system isn't even on. So anyway, and then this semester has been more of a pain than last semester because they teach down there right before they teach up here. And so it's the system set up to go the opposite direction. So you have to make sure you change everything back. But that's why it'd be great if that guy gets there. Anyway, we'll continue here for a second, and hopefully somebody will get down there. If not, they will have this archive. Okay, so we've got our ArcGIS server connection. Does everybody see this? See this ArcGIS server connection? In fact, there's a map service that's already published. It's right there. We can actually preview it and see it. It's a map service of all the world cities. Okay, so we can see that world cities map right there. Okay. Everybody see what I'm seeing? All right. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go back to our map document. Here's our map document in ArcMap. And we're going to publish this as another map service on our server. And we can't all name it the same thing. So I suggest we all call this something like your last name and then test or something, because this really is a map service just to make sure that we can test and we can do it. All right. Now, so far, I want to make this accessible anywhere in the world, but as of right now, you would have to be on campus to do what we've done, and you will continue to until until iTech changes the port number. Okay, and then you'd be able to do it off campus. All right. So if you've got your map document open, did somebody come in that room? Anyway, go to File, Share As, Service. And we're going to publish a service. Yeah. There's three options here. Basically, the center one says Save as a Service Definition File. That means that we want to get it ready to publish, but we don't actually want to publish it. We just have a file that we can later use to publish it. It's not as common, but there are some workflows where that would happen. Let me see if this is Jennifer. Okay. Then the last one is to overwrite an existing service. Okay, overwriting existing service is something that you would do if you wanted to change a service. You could do that. We're going to publish a new one. Hit Next. Select an existing connection. It should be there. Maybe it's not there because we started ArcMap first. Just going to reopen up ArcMap. Try it again. Was anybody else's there in the drop down? Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know why mine wasn't there, but now if I go to Share As Service, pretty sure it'll be there. Yep. ArcGIS on 10. So it's there. The default for the service name is, now that looks weird down there. Okay. I guess they hung up. So the default for the service name is the name of the map document. This is where I'm going to change it to. I'll change mine to Raber Test. You can change it to whatever you want. Okay, Raber Test. That kind of hurt. Cut myself on the side of the podium here. Okay, so Raber Test, hit Next. And now it asks us to use an existing folder or create a new folder. So this is where I want you to create a folder for yourself. Okay. Now, what's kind of weird is that in a file system, you can name a folder. You can name a folder something, and then that folder can have subfolders. In ArcGIS server here, there's only one layer, and that's the folder. So servers have folders, but there's nothing below folders. Inside folders are services. There's no folders and folders inside of folders. And I don't know if this has changed, but it used to be that just because it was in a folder, you couldn't name it something that. So in other words, I couldn't name it test in my folder, and then you could name it test in your folder. The server can still only have one server named each thing. Okay, so that's why we called it Raber test. All right, so the new folder we're going to create is just going to be your last name, and put it in that folder. So now you'll be able to publish anything you want to publish for this course inside that folder. The IVN's not what? Okay, so the IVN's just broken. Okay. What's that? Okay. All right. Well, yeah, maybe I'll have to meet with them separately to discuss this portion of it, or they can watch the. Hopefully everything on the video will record well. All right. So creating a new folder called Raber, and hit continue. And then here we got a whole lot of options, and we won't talk about all of them right now, but we will talk about some of them. Okay, so this is the name of the service, what folder it's in, and then the name of the actual service. It doesn't accept spaces. Maybe some of you already figured that out. When I typed in Raber test, it was without a space. All right, so let's look down at parameters. So the parameters tell us which map document it's going to use. It also tells us, lets us specify a few things. This is something that always catches people off guard. A map service, you're able to request information. So like you can say, okay, I want to see the map, but as an alternative, I want the server to return all the records that start with, like, let's say they're parcels. I want to return all the records where the owner's last name is Smith. Well, it may be that there's more than 1,000 records in your county or in your unit where the last name of the owner is Smith. If there are more than 1,000, the server will actually stop and only give you 1,000 if you leave that at 1,000. Okay, so sometimes that will happen. We'll just leave that as the default, but that's a good thing to remember. The drawback of allowing that to be larger is that somebody could flood your server with a request, basically returning all of the data for a particular layer. It could get to be a lot of information. All right. Capabilities. We're going to turn on WMS because we're going to learn a little bit about WMS either today or later in the week. And then we're going to leave all the rest of those turned off, I'm pretty sure. We'll learn about some of these, but we're not going to turn on any of the others. Okay. All right. Now, next, we're going to go to mapping. Remember, I told you earlier that you could change the symbology and the layer order dynamically in some map services if you enabled that. Well, this is the checkbox that will allow you to do that. Allow per request modifications of layer order and symbology. For now, we're going to leave that unchecked. Okay, but that's how you enable that. We're going to leave all the defaults for WMS the way they are. Same with KML. So this will allow us to dynamically create a KML file. The server will serve up a KML file for the data that we're looking at. Okay. All right, pooling here. Remember, I told you that a web mapping server was nothing but a program running on a server. Well, the program that's waiting for requests, can only get so busy. I mean, it's going to handle a request, it's going to do it, it's going to give it back. You could actually change right here in the service properties. You can change how many instances of that program are running. This is kind of like having up 2 ArcMaps on your desktop. Okay, obviously, if you have 5 ARC maps and 6 ARC, at some point your computer is going to say, okay, I give up. But having 2 ARC maps on your computer will allow the computer to accept 2 incoming requests at the same time, to simultaneously process those 2 requests. And so sometimes it's good to increase that number. We're going to leave it the same, but if you do have a web service that needs more requests, that's one way to increase that. Okay. Now, ArcGIS Server is smart enough to figure out that eventually you might need more than 1 request per machine, so you could up that number to a higher number, and it would automatically create more instances until it got to a point where it wouldn't work. Most machines these days will only be able to handle about, like, even a high-end server machine are only going to be able to handle like 30 to 50 services running at the same time, ArcGIS services running at the same time, from my personal experience. I'm not sure ESRI has that documented anywhere, but there is a limit because each one uses some memory. So as your machine gets better and better, you can have more and more information, you can have more and more services running, but there is a limit because each one takes some memory in the server. All right. Here we're going to leave the defaults. These just say, okay, when a request comes in, how long does the server have to process that request before it gives up? Because most clients, most web browsers have a timeout period anyway. And so we don't want the server to just keep working on something, even if it takes a very long time to process and return that, because if we do, then the server's probably needlessly doing things that take a long time when the client's already gave up and said, I'm through, I don't want to see that anymore. So if it takes your map more than 600 seconds to draw, most people, we can safely assume that most people have given up and they don't want to see your map anyway. You probably can make that lower in reality, but what this will do is after 600 seconds, if a particular request hasn't finished processing yet, the server will give up and it'll be able to use that memory for other things that it's doing. And then, sometimes if the machine is very, very busy, it queues up the requests from the client, and so it says, okay, if there's a certain request that's been in the queue longer than 60 seconds, I'm not even going to process it. So this way you don't build up a ton of requests in your queue. Now, really, this is just a band-aid. When you actually had a problem like that, it's more indicative of the fact that your hardware doesn't provide for the requests properly that you're getting. So this just helps your hardware not to crash, and so that the site stays available for some people and just ignores other people is what you're doing there. Okay, so that's those parameters. Okay, processes. We won't get into this for now. Right now, we're just going to leave all these the defaults. Every 24 hours, it's just gonna restart the service so that if there's anything that's been going on over and over and over again that's causing a memory leak or whatnot, it gets rid of it. All right, caching. This is where in ArcGIS, this isn't how you do it in the open source world, but in ArcGIS, this is how you set up a tiled map service. Okay, we're going to make ours dynamic for now, so we're going to ignore that. But this is how you'd set that up. And there are different tiling schemes you can use. But notice if you do use one of these, it's just going to create a bunch of tiles, and the users are no longer going to be able to turn off individual layers, turn them on. We're just selecting. We're just making a bunch of, in this case, PNGs. Okay. I'm going to say dynamically from data, and then item description. We could add descriptions, which are always good. They help the end user know what your map service is all about. They may be required. At one time they were. We could also post it to ArcGIS Online. We're not going to do that right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit Analyze. When I hit Analyze, it's going to tell me if there are any errors or warnings. Okay. And notice that I said, okay, does anybody else say this? Data frames with clip shape are not supported. Yeah, the only reason why mine says that is because I tried to, remember I tried to demonstrate clipping the shape in the data frame. I didn't even mean to do that. So I'm just going to go in here and go back to data frame and say other, no clipping, and hit apply and say okay. So now I'm going to hit analyze again, and hopefully that'll go away. Yep, so that went away. So everybody else still have these 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation points. Okay. Those exclamation points mean that it will still allow you to publish this map service, but these are things to watch out for. The first one there is the data source is not registered with the server, and the data will be copied to the server. Okay. So right now, this is the only option we have, and it's going to take a few minutes when we actually hit go. We may want to stagger our what we do here, but the data source itself is the data. I remember when we showed you the diagram a few weeks ago, we had the client, and then the client comes in, makes a request. Sometimes we have a web server. We always have a map server when we're dealing with GIS, and sometimes we have a data server, and they can all really be the same machine. But right now, our ArcGIS server is saying, you're trying to publish this map document, but I have no idea where your data is. So if you want to publish this, I'm going to take the data that you want to publish and move it up onto the server. I'm going to copy it from your local machine up onto the server. Okay. So that's the warning here, is that it's going to take a little while because I'm going to copy up the data that you've published up onto the server. And we can get around this. We can basically move our data up onto the server manually and then tell the server where to look. Okay, but we're not going to do that for this particular time. All right. Map is being published with data copied to the server using the data frame full extent. Again, because it's going to copy it up, it's telling you the more data you're giving me, the longer it's going to take to copy up to the server. We're not using a huge amount of data, so hopefully this won't take too long. Okay, it's just telling us here that we're missing some tags. We didn't put anything in our description, so people won't know what we're talking about. And then some other things that we talked about last week were our layers draw at all scale ranges. So no matter whether you're zoomed way out or zoomed way in, you'll still see our data. I could change that real quick. So I've got my map document here. I could zoom out one more time, and then I could go into properties, or maybe it's the properties for the roads. Yep. Under general, I could say don't show this when zoomed out beyond 1 to 250,000 and hit apply. Okay. So now if I zoom out one more time, my roads disappear. I zoom in, my roads reappear, disappear. Okay, I'm going to hit save. Okay, let's see what happens if I hit analyze again. I don't know if that changed from 3 items to 2 items. Maybe it did. Hopefully, I mean, from 4 items to 3 items, maybe it did. I'm not sure. Okay, so we've got one layer that will not appear all the time. All right, and now that I've hit analyze, and I understand all of the potential errors, I can hit publish. So publish my map, my GIS resource. Okay. Now it's going to tell me which layers are going to go up to the server. Everybody get this message? Okay. So at this point, it's going to attempt to copy this data up to the server. All right. And I'm going to hit OK to do that. Everybody hit OK. It's going to take a few minutes. I have no idea. I should have tested this before, but I have no idea exactly how long it's going to take. It looks like it's gone through one already, but it's probably the towns, and that's the easiest one to get on the server. So now it looks like it's updating roads, which is the second hardest one. So this will be a good gauge. And then next it will do the Hattiesburg city limits, which should be pretty quick. And it got published successfully. Anybody else's work or no? Still running? Okay, anybody else have that warning? Okay. All right, that's not a big deal today, but what that means is that remember when we went through the exercise, we converted some of the coordinate systems of these layers, and what that means is that you ended up using one of the ones we didn't convert, or your data frame was in a different one. I can look at that real quick to see which one it is. Yeah, it did publish. And it's still gonna, everything's gonna work, but it, yeah. Yeah. So your data frame is in transfer coordinator. Let's see what your data is. That's in the right projection. Right. And this is the other one before you click it. We're gonna go ahead and just get rid of that one. And then what I'm gonna do, well, this is actually. And then, so what I did was I changed so that you had all of the individual layers in the correct coordinate system, but the actual map itself was still in the coordinate system of the original data. And so that's what I did was I just went into the layers and changed the coordinate system of the overall layers. And now I'm gonna this time I'll say overwrite, and then we left everything here the same, right? So now there's nothing about the coordinate system. Oh, we did say, oh, it looks like it kept it on. So now it's just going to take a second. Anybody else have that coordinate system here? All right. So double click on this. Coordinate system. Double click on how you do roads. So that's still an MSTM. So you didn't change the projection of that one, which, I mean, like I said, for today it's no big deal. But you'd want to change the projection of this one and see if you did it for me. not getting to that one. Didn't do that. But yeah, in the end, what you need to do is also set this to be this same as the. So basically, you want everything in that direction for it to draw the fastest. Now the raster is the one, and you do have the raster in the right place. The raster is the one that will cause it to draw the slowest. So you could just republish it the way it is and leave the vectors. So now I'm just doing what I did with Matt there and say share a service, and then it's still going to give you the warning. Do you have a warning? No, set everything to set everything to Web Mapping auxiliary sphere, including the layers. All right. So the MST, you need to set everything to MSTM, including the layers, and sorry, not everything to 3857 Web Mercator auxiliary sphere, including the overall layers right here. So mine, if I look at the coordinate system, auxiliary sphere for that one, an auxiliary sphere for all of the other ones, right? Okay, so now we have our web service created, and what we need to do now is we could look at it. So if you go in onto the internet and you type in the URL, again, we usually think of the internet working everywhere, but this is only going to work on campus for now until this is exposed. So you type in the number there. I should have written it down somewhere. 10.64.78.100. 10.64.78.100 / ArcGIS, and then / REST. So this is the interface. It looks like you published a couple of them, Lamar, which is fine. You could have overwritten one, and you can do that later if you want to. You can also go into our catalog and delete things. So if I go into our catalog and I hit refresh here, I can look for my service, Raber, and if I wanted to, I could just delete it right there. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go into Raber, and then I'm going to see Raber test, and then finally, I can see the layers that I have published. I can see the initial extent, the full extent. I see a bunch of information. And if I click on, something we've already done, ArcGIS Online Map Viewer, if I click on that, it'll bring up this web service that I've just created in ArcGIS. Now, again, people won't be able to see this off campus, but as soon as we get that remedied, they would. Now we can see our layer on ArcGIS Online, and we could add layers from other data sources. We could turn on and off different layers. So if I go in here, I could turn off the towns for a second. I could turn them back on. Okay, they've been published as a map service. Okay. See if I can show the legend for towns. It's even going to let me do a little query. I could say, okay, if the name is, I don't know. Okay, none of them were Hattiesburg. So I just messed up on my my filter, but I could filter them out using a query. So I have that published. Okay. Now we're looking at them in a web client, which is our ultimate goal, to look at things in a web client. However, most web services, most web mapping services have been created so that you can also look at them in a desktop client, and that's actually pretty useful to do. Okay. Sometimes if you're having trouble getting your map service to look right, and you publish it on one machine, one thing you can do to debug that is just bring it up in ArcGIS. Okay, so you can do that in ArcGIS. We can. I'm going to open up a new ArcMap window. Right click and say I'm just trying to open. I have this saved, so I'll just hit say new. Okay. So now I want to file. I want to add data, but I can add data from an existing GIS server. Okay. So if I go to ArcGIS, I can go into Raber and add this. And even if I wasn't an administrator, I'd be able to do that. So now I can see my service right here. So the difference between the map document that I published and this map document is now what I see here and all of the data that I see here are actually on the server that's now over in my office. I'm not actually looking at the local copy of this information anymore. And it does cause some limitations. Even though I'm using ArcGIS as a client, because the data isn't actually on this server, I can't do I can't go in here and change any of the properties, okay? Because really I'm looking at a picture of the data. So I don't see any of the properties for that data. I don't see any of the properties for any of the data sources. So I can't even change the order of these layers because that's something that I limited the ArcGIS server to do. Okay. So if you think about what's happening, right now ArcGIS is kind of like a web browser. And when I brought this service up, it's actually, instead of getting any data locally, it's saying, okay, this is the extent of the data frame. Provide me with the data that's inside of that data frame, and I draw a map, and I'm going to show that picture on the client. So this is just a picture of the data. All the GIS type work is actually being done on the server. It's drawing a picture, passing that through. Okay. All right. Now we're going to have to learn a little bit about, I called it the nuts and bolts of how that's done earlier. So we're going to have to learn a little bit about that. And that gets to the second part of what I wanted to talk about today. So if you go to the document here, this is what I'm referring to. This is the reading for today. Okay. All right. Now, the first concept that I want to discuss is this concept of a specification. Okay. A specification is nothing but a set of rules for how I'm going to make my service available to people. Okay. Because remember, the technology, the server technology, is nothing but a set of requests and responses, or responses and requests. I make a request to a server, I get a response. But if I have no idea how to formulate a request or how to handle its response, then it's not going to magically show up inside of ArcGIS like it just did. Okay. I need to know that information. Okay. So it says in here that the specification is kind of like the Bible. So it's like a contract that must be closely honored in order for the website to correctly function. And I could say for the client. The client doesn't have to be a website, but it's going to be a website for us. Okay. So requests to the server almost always take the form of a URL. It's not always true, but most of the time in modern context, that's true. We're going to send a request as a URL, and sometimes we call that thing that we're requesting a response from a resource. And in fact, URL stands for, the R in URL stands for resource. It's a universal resource locator. Where is it? Well, that's where it is. All right. When we make a request to a server, a map server, sometimes what we want to get back is an image. In fact, a lot of times what we want to get back is an image. There's still a specification that says this is how the request has to be made. Okay. But the response is just an image. However, that's not always true. Sometimes what we want from our service, whether it's a map service or not, is we want data, we want information back from the service. And in those cases, the information that gets passed back can be in all sorts of different formats, but the specification specifies how that data will be transported back to the client and what the format will be of that data as it's transported back to the client. And there are two basic general, I called them formats here. Formats should be used kind of loosely. Two different general formats for the data coming back that we're going to hit on here. There's actually more than that, but we're going to hit on those two because they're very common, not just inside of web mapping, and they're formats that are easily readable by computers. And that's what we want to have happen. The first one is called XML, and it stands for Extensible Markup Language. And I know I introduced that concept on the first day, but XML looks a lot like HTML. It's got tags in it, and web browsers are already very good at handling documents that are tagged like this. And so if we want to use a web browser as a client, we can do things like say, okay, you probably already realize this, but let's say we have a web browser and we want all of the images to be turned off. Well, there is a computer programming way to say, okay, find all the images in this document and set their display equal to none. In other words, I don't want to see all the images in the document. Maybe you have a button that says turn all the images off, and it would turn all the images off, okay? Well, picture a document where instead of tags for images, we had tags for things like records. And I could say, okay, I want to find all of the records where the last name is Smith, okay? So there would be a method for doing that. And an XML would be one language that you could do that. The other one is called JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON. JSON is when both of these were first introduced, XML was probably more widely used. Today, JSON is probably more widely used. JSON is just a specification for sharing data that can be read very easily by JavaScript. Okay, we'll talk about these more later. Even later today, I'll show you some examples. But in a couple weeks, when we start actually making our own web mapping products, we'll get even further into this. Okay. So WMS primarily uses XML. ArcGIS servers primarily use JSON. So we're gonna get into both of those. We're gonna get into both of those later. Okay. All right. Just to give you an idea of what a couple specifications look like, we'll look at both the specification for ArcGIS map services and for WMS map services. So you can look at this URL here. It's actually taking you to a PDF, And if you scroll down to section 7 here, it goes over the specification for how maps are specified, how maps are requested from a WMS server. So you can see here that for a get map request, in other words, a request to a map server where I'm trying to get a map, here are the different parameters that I can send along with the URL. Okay, I can say, okay, I want only to see these layers. I want to see a different style. I want to have the coordinate system be changed. Here's the coordinate system I want to request. Now it says that it's mandatory, but it doesn't mean that every WMS supports every coordinate system projection. You can specify the bounding box, which actually is required. You'd have to specify what you wanted to see. You could specify the width, the height, and all these other elements. Okay, so that's the specification for a WMS. Again, you don't have to, like the reading says, you don't have to know everything about this. Here's the specification for ArcGIS's interface. And if you went down to the, let's see, your own services, map service, you could see the specification for a map service. So you can specify, okay, so this would be the equivalent of get map. In ArcGIS, it's called export map. So in a WMS, you type the URL /get map and send it a bunch of parameters. In ArcGIS, you put the URL /export, and these are the parameters that you can specify. Notice that they're very similar. You can specify a bounding box. You can specify the size. That's per inch. You can specify the spatial reference. You can specify which layers you want to see, and so how much transparency you want. Okay, so this is the specification for getting a map from a map service. So one of the nice things about web mapping and really about most services is that there are already libraries written that help you to interface with this. You don't often have to understand all of the individual nuts and bolts, but you do. But it does help to know what parameters are available, and then find out how to actually change those on whatever client you're using. Okay. All right. So that's so we said here. Okay. Another thing is that ArcGIS calls its service the REST API. Okay. REST stands for representational state transfer, and basically this is a term that means that there's a uniform interface and that it's stateless in nature. Okay, what that means, stateless, it means that every time the client makes a request to the server, it's as if the server is seeing that request for the first time. They don't understand any other request that you made previous, and this request isn't going to affect anything that goes on in any further request. So, in other words, let's go back to this for a second. Okay. When I first loaded this map, it made a request to the server and said, I want to see this map service. Give me the map service. And it returned that map service to ArcGIS as an image. And then it also actually returned the default layers that were turned on, everything to the client. And the client said, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn on all the default layers. And that's what you see. Now, if I uncheck Hattiesburg, okay, what do you think is happening when I uncheck Hattiesburg? Is it making a new request to the server? Remember, the data isn't stored on the server. It's just a picture. This is just an image. So when I uncheck Hattiesburg, it needs a whole new image. It can't even, the client, in this case ArcGIS, can't even remove that green boundary by itself, okay? Because that green boundary is actually burned in. This is actually a JPEG or PNG, and this green boundary is drawn on a whole nother machine. So every time I uncheck Hattiesburg, it makes a trip to the server, and what that request looks like is it doesn't say, okay, turn off Hattiesburg. That's not what it says. What it says is, I need this map service, and I need Hattiesburg Towns, Hattiesburg Roads, and Hattiesburg DEM turned on. The response comes back to the client and does that again. Now, if I turn Hattiesburg on, it says, I need this map service again. The server has no idea who's even using this stuff. So in other words, the client never gets to come back and say, hey, remember me? I want this map service, the same map service that I had last time, but just turn one layer off. No, it has to, each time it makes a full request for everything. It says, I need this map service, I need this layer, and this layer, and this layer turned on, okay? So each time it makes the request. That's what representational state transfer means, that it's stateless. The client keeps track of the state. The client keeps track of which layers are turned on. The server doesn't keep track of that. So when we uncheck something and we make a new request, it has to send everything back. Okay. All right, let's show that concept a little bit more. So if I go back to my map service here, I'm going to click on Export Map. Okay, and by default, when I click Export Map, this is like ArcGIS loading it in for the first time. You see all the layers. And in fact, you actually don't see the roads layer because we're not zoomed in far enough, right? See, we're not zoomed in that far. Okay. Let's say I want to zoom in further. Well, zooming in further means that this box needs to be smaller, okay? In order to do that. So how do I make this box smaller? Well, these are just coordinates. And so if I go to the left, which would be, this would be the minimum value. If I go to the left and bring that in a little bit further, so I'm not quite as far out, maybe I could go to 900632. And then from this one, if I went, this one would probably be the minimum. I'm going to go to the max. The max Y, which would be this number right here. So this is the X min. This is the Y min. This is the X max. And this is the Y max. I'm going to change this value a little bit. I'm going to go down to 5, and then I'm just going to hit Export Map. Okay, it didn't change at all. My bounding box didn't get any smaller, although you think it would. I might have to get actual coordinates because my coordinates aren't showing up very well. I mean, my guess is that coordinates aren't very good. 5. Did that go down? Yeah, that used to be 6. I thought. Let me go over just a little bit. So this one would be the minimum value. Let's go to 5, see what happens. No, 4. Still not zooming in. So let's look here. I've got a way to get around this. I'm just not picking good coordinates. But if I go like this and go to inspect, go to developer tools, and go to, let me move this down here and hit network, and I zoom out and then zoom back in, I'll be able to get just this, copy that URL. Oops, not copy the response. I'm going to put that in here. Oops, it's not the open link in new tab. There we go. All right, so this is the image that it returned. Notice that the format that was requested is PNG 32, and the overall format is an image. If I change this back to HTML, I'll see this. So notice the difference between this image and this image here. Those are just two different requests to the server. One is, that's just this image. I tried, one thing I could do is take this image here and copy the bounding box. Actually, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to take this one, copy the bounding box over to this map, and hit export map again. I don't know why that's not working. Maybe it needs to have the all of these parameters. Yep. Okay. So I was trying to. I thought that it would imply what those other parameters were. Okay, but it didn't. So I had to specify not only the bounding box, but the image size and the dots per inch to get the box to look exactly the same. So now the boxes in these two images look exactly the same. What are the differences between these two images? Well, one has a clear background and one has a white background. And that's because I've said I want my image format, or sorry, I've said background transparent to false. If I set it to true and re-requested that, now they would both look the same. Now, what if I didn't want the roads layer to show up? Well, that's simple. I could just change my show layers to say, oh, I only want to show, I don't want to show that layer. I also don't want to see the background layer, the DEM. I could change that. If I wanted to show the background layer, sorry, if I want to show the roads layer but not any of the other layers, I could change that. I can basically modify and change what I see in the images. Okay. Now, when we actually get into making our web maps, the point I'm trying to get across is that very rarely are you going to be modifying. See this big URL string that it's creating? Very rarely are you modifying that directly. I mean, you could, you know, if you really wanted to create a web service from, I mean, a web map from scratch, your web map would be changing those things. Okay, but I'm just trying to show you how it's done. So the computer programmer that's programmed the client, whatever that client is, whether it's a web map or it's ArcGIS server, or it's ArcMap, or even if it's QGIS, I do want to show an example of how you could do this in QGIS. Regardless of how you created it, it's just sending back and forth these URLs and the responses. Okay? And when it makes a request, leaving it in HTML format gives it to you in this easily readable format. Okay? Easy for humans to read. Now, if you want to, you could set this to be image, which would mean I just want the image. And this is actually how ArcGIS Online is getting it back. See that? This is the request, the response that it's received back. Okay. All right. Same with ArcMap. This is what it's gotten back. It's hard to find out where that came from, but that's what's happening. All right. Now we could change that to be. Sorry, wrong. We could change that instead of being image. We could change that to get the request back in what we call JSON. That's the JSON response, okay? And JSON works like this. Objects, things that it's giving you back, they could be records, they could be data, whatever it is, are annotated by squiggly brackets. So the squiggly bracket right here says this is the beginning of an object, and one of the object's properties is the href. Okay, the href means the URL, where it is. So this is the URL for this particular object. Okay, here's the other parameters: the width, the height, the extent, everything else that some client might need to know. Okay, but this data would be. This is actually easier for a machine to read by far than the HTML was. So I'm going to change this to HTML. That's easier for a human to read. This interface is set up so that you can quickly debug and see what your server is serving up. And after you figure out how to format these parameters right, you can quickly see if your layers are able to turn off and on like you want them to be. Okay, so it's easier for a human to read. Then the JSON is easier for a computer to read. There is a compromise. I think it's called PJSON. That stands for Pretty JSON. Okay, that's actually what it stands for. Now, not all servers implement this, but all ArcGIS servers implement this. It just puts everything on a single line and indents. So we can see that there's actually one big object coming back from the server that tells us where it is and how big it is. It also tells us the spatial extent, but that spatial extent is actually another object. See, the squiggly mark here indicates another object is starting. The squiggly mark here represents another object is starting. Okay. So an extent is really a min, max for X and for Y, along with a spatial reference. And a spatial reference itself has different properties. Okay. All right. Now let's see if we can do any other format. I'm going to try XML. That's not supported. Okay. So the ArcGIS server format doesn't support data being transferred back and forth in XML. That's different than the WMS specification. Okay, so let's look at that real quick. You can read all that. Okay. So we'll come back to this in a second. Okay. The WMS specification is a little different. Here, we didn't set one up yet, but here's an example of a WMS request. Okay. So here's a WMS request, and just like the just like the ArcGIS request, this is a request to a service, and I got this map that represents it's I think it's just population. No, it's not population. It's some layer in some layer in Europe, obviously in Europe. Okay. Now we can also go ahead and change things in here. I'm not sure again if I need exactly what things I need to change, but the point is, if I change this to like 400, I should get a different map. Yeah. All right, that doesn't look very pretty. It's squashed here up down. I'm going to go back, but I can change different things. It may or may not allow me to change the image format. It does. So now I've got a JPEG instead of a PNG. There are ways to find out in the WMS format what sort of things I can change. Here's a simple list of those operations right here. Okay. I can change the layers. I can change which request I'm giving it to. I can change the spatial reference system. In fact, let's see if I can change this to 3857. I doubt this will work, but just for fun. Nope, it didn't work. This is basically a message that says it didn't work. In order to change the coordinate system to Web Mercator, I would also need to change the bounding box to Web Mercator. And so probably that bounding box doesn't even exist in the world for Web Mercator is the issue. Okay. So there's the bounding box, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, WMS services and map services aren't the only two types of services. They are the major services for web mapping. They're the services that return maps to us. Okay. However, there are other ones. Okay. There's a list here in the open source world. We often call them W*S services because the middle is what changes. So a WMS is a web map service. We've seen what they do. They're basically for dynamic map services. A WFS is called a web feature service, and a web feature service returns features to the client. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the course. But returning features to the client would return either XML or JSON data to the client, and then the client would have to symbolize that that information. A web coverage service is, who knows what a coverage is in the ArcGIS world? A coverage is an older format that is a file format. This is totally different. I don't know why they used the same word, but a WCS, a web coverage service, are basically basically services for raster data. Okay, you could put a raster data in a WMS service, but a WCS, a web coverage service, has additional capabilities for clipping on the fly and dynamically adjusting a raster data set. Okay, and then a web processing service is a very new standard for invoking geoprocessing operations on the server. Now, ArcGIS has its equivalents. Okay, the equivalent of a WMS is called a it's called a map server, and we've set a map server up now. We know what that is. A feature service is the equivalent of a WFS, and a feature service allows you to make requests and get features back as JSON. In fact, we've already done that. You just didn't know that yet. I can go back here to my map service that I created, right? And I'm going to go back to this screen right here. And if I click on H towns, and then I click on query, I could say something like, I'm just going to make a really simple query because there's only a few observations in there. FID is greater than 0. That should be all the records. And I could say query get. Okay. Now it's telling me that there are 2 records. Okay. These are and it's returning the 2 records, and I could actually have it even return the geometry. Return geometry true. It is. Oh yeah, it does. It has returned the geometry because it's just a point, an X and a Y point. And I could actually change the return type to pretty JSON. And now I've got some data that it would be very easy for a web browser to show this data in a web browser. I could take those points, I could symbolize them however I wanted to, and put them on a web browser. And that's actually what we'll talk about here in a couple weeks. But we've already set up a WFS. I mean, sorry, not a WFS, an ArcGIS feature service. So by default, when you set up a map service, it sets up a feature service for that data. Now it's a little bit different because by default, when you set it up, you can't edit those features. You can only view them, which is most of the time what you want anyway. But you have to do some special things to make it so that you can edit them, and that's what I said here. Okay, and then finally an image service. An image service is roughly equivalent to that coverage service. An image service is really an exciting tool. Hopefully we'll get to talk about it later in the course. But an image service basically allows you to dynamically alter rasters on the fly. So you can change the color lookup table so that it goes from green to red, red to green. You can actually do like band math. You could say, I want to see. Let's say you have an image, an actual image from a satellite, and it has a red, green, blue, and a near infrared band. If you publish it in an image service, you can actually say, I want to see an NDVI of that. I want to see a ratio of the band 3 to band 4, and it'll do that on the fly and show that to you. That's an image service. It allows you to adjust rasters on the fly. And then a geoprocessing service, I think we talked about that last week, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but basically that allows you to publish a geoprocessing workflow, in other words, a model or a script that you've written in ArcGIS. So if somebody wants to do that, they can. Okay, I discussed this. The final thing that I want to talk about today is I want to talk about the WMS specification. If I go open a web browser with this European one, the last time I did this, the first time I did this, maybe I closed it. I said question mark get map, right? And then I put a whole bunch of parameters behind it, and it gave me a map. So it's not going to get that this time. However, if I want to find out some additional information about things that I can do to this particular map service, I can make the request get capabilities. I can write get capabilities, press enter, and now I told you that WMS usually uses XML. Well, according to the specification, it uses XML, not usually. It does use XML. So this is XML. So you've seen JSON now. Now you can see XML. So XML looks a lot like HTML. And you can see here that you can see the name of the service. You can see the soil threats. You can see the different keywords that are published. if we look down in here, you can see these are the different formats that are supported. I just guessed that JPEG would be supported. Remember when I changed that? You could specify it as a TIFF. It'll actually output a KML and a KMZ. These are the names of the layers. Okay, look, these are the only two coordinate systems that are supported. 3035, which is the one that was in the request already, and the other one that's supported is 4326, which is latitude and longitude. So those are the only ones that are supported. Here's the names of the layers. So the one that we did, the OC top 80, is organic carbon content. Okay. Here's another one though, soil erosion in tons per hectare per year. Let's see what that one looks like. So what we could do is, maybe I already closed it. Let's open it back up. Whoops. Layers. So there should be one in here that says which layer is turned on. Get map, format. You see a layers equals. I don't see layers, yep. Okay, so you could delete this layer and paste that in. And now we should see that other layer. If it works right. So now we've got a different layer that's showing up. We could change this and put a comma in between. That's how it works in WMS, and put the second layer down there. Sorry. The only problem is that it's only going to show us. It's going to show us both layers, but because both layers are totally opaque, we only see one layer where there's not already another layer. Okay. All right. So one of the things that you probably noticed is that when we try to specify what layers we're on in the ArcGIS world, we just use numbers, and when we did it in WMS world, we had to know the layer names. Okay. So that's the difference. So there's two different specifications out there. They're widely used. That's a difference between them. There's all sorts of other differences. You probably notice that the whole URL looks a little different, that's a difference. So the specification is simply a document describing what the request needs to look like and how the response is going to come back. And those specifications are absolutely necessary in order for people to create either web mapping applications or regular clients like ArcMap to consume that data. And in fact, we did create our data as I'm going to go back to here. We did create our data as a WMS. So if I look under Raber test, I don't see it. It's not published here in the REST inter. Oh, here it is, the WMS. So I could look at my map service as a WMS. So I've got the XML. Then this is the get capabilities. So I could see the layers. Here's the so the layer names that it's given it are just 1, 2, 3. That's kind of interesting. But the reason why I'm showing you this is that because the specification is out there and exists, ArcGIS just chose to implement this specification. So now we're sharing our data also as a WMS. So other people who have clients that are written to consume WMS maps could see our data, okay, or could utilize our data, could utilize our maps. We could bring those up right in ArcGIS. Here's the URL to the WMS service. if we wanted to, we could say, okay, we're going to add some data, and we're going to go into GIS servers and add a WMS server. Here's the URL. It's not getting that. Maybe there we go. I didn't need that last part, the get capabilities part. It just figured that out itself. Okay, so now I'm going to add that WMS service. And it's not going to be very exciting because the WMS service looks pretty much just like the Raber test service, but they're being transported through the web in two different specifications. So ArcMap has implemented its own proprietary specification for sharing the data, and it's implemented the WS specification for sharing data. So it's done both of those. And there are plenty of web clients that do the same. Okay, they implement both WMS and the open standard. And so it's it just allows more possibilities. The ArcGIS, of course, thinks that their specification is better. Okay, and in some ways it is because it's newer, and so it uses newer web technologies like JSON to share the data rather than slightly older technologies like XML. There's nothing actually inherently wrong with XML. It is more verbose. It requires more text to say the same thing. Okay, because the squiggly brackets are less text, and you don't have to start and end a tag. Okay, so there's different reasons why you would choose JSON, why ArcGIS decided to use JSON as the standard for sharing its data. But inherently, there's nothing better. ArcGIS does like its, or ESRI does like its specification more, and that's why it created that specification. Okay. Now, once we start talking about features in a couple weeks, there is another feature specification called GeoJSON. That's an open specification that the open source world thinks is better than ArcGIS feature specification. But so the take-home message here is that we can publish our own services. In ArcGIS, we can publish our services as map services or as WMS services and consume them. And then I'll try to get GeoServer running, and the assignment will be to do some of what we've done manually, turning on and off layers and utilizing those, but I didn't get a chance to write that up. Now, according to the schedule, there's been a slight adjustment, and I'll go ahead and update the syllabus, but I just wanted to make this announcement that next Thursday, we won't meet. I forgot whether that's on the syllabus as a non-meeting point, but I'll be gone next Thursday, a week from this Thursday. So what is that, 9 days from now, I will be gone. Now, originally I said that I would be gone for, I think, the next meeting as well, the next Tuesday. That's no longer the case. So the only meeting I'm missing now is that Thursday. So we just won't meet. I think that we had I don't know what we had scheduled. Let's look at that really quick, just so that we can see. Oh, I got Blackboard already open. Syllabus. I'm going to update this syllabus here, but yeah. So we had an exam scheduled. So what I'll do is probably schedule the exam on the 24th. Okay. And on the 22nd, we'll catch up with what we've been doing and discuss what would be on the exam. Okay, so the 17th is the day that we don't meet. So We'll still meet on the 15th, and I will not be traveling the entire week of that 22nd through the 24th. So I'll be around. I'll even be here to proctor the exam, and we'll meet on the 22nd and catch up with anything that we've missed up to this point, and do that. Okay. So today this week we're on this, basically, right? And these 2 weeks we're covering together publishing and creating map services and ArcGIS and WMS data. And you can see we've already made a pretty good dent. But we only have 2 more meeting times because the 17th we're not going to meet. All right. Everybody have any questions about the schedule? No meeting on the 17th. Exam's not till the 24th. Okay. Yeah. And actually, yeah, I'll tell you next week. I may even push the exam back 1 more week, because the only reason I had the exam that week is because I was traveling. I didn't want to waste a day, and so I'm thinking that it might be better to include tiled map services on that first exam, and then the second half, everything after the exam, we're actually programming and building our web maps. And so up to that point, we're talking about how it's done, and then after that point, we're actually doing it. So I may move this, but for sure, don't worry about an exam being on the 22nd. I will be gone the 17th, and we may even flip these 2 weeks so that the exam wouldn't even be until the first week in October. Until the 1st of October. All right. Anybody have any questions about that? All right. Cool. We'll go ahead and end for today. I'm going to see if this worked and then the voice worked, because that would be great if the coast didn't have to get re-lectured to. Let me see if that worked. All right.